It is May 30th, 2025. This is Patrick Barnard in Montreal with the 18th edition of the International Press Review. Well, time has moved on since Friday. It's now Sunday, June 1st, 2025. We're continuing with this press review. The 16th International Press Review focused on a Human Rights Watch report, Gaza, latest Israeli plan inches closer to extermination. That was about 2 weeks ago that report was issued. It turned out to be prophetic because the most terrible situation is taking place in the north of Gaza right now. We're going to just take a look at a report by an extraordinary journalist, Hani Mahmoud, who works for Al Jazeera, and he's reporting now from Gaza City and what is happening there.
There were apartment blocks, there were homes. They housed hundreds of Palestinian families who are now sleeping in the streets, in temporary shelters, or not at all. This building behind me held over 40 people. One moment they were breaking bread together, and the next they are running for their lives or buried underneath the rubble of the bombed buildings. And the worst part, the bombings do not stop. The aftermath of these bombings and relentless attacks is just there are no safe shelters left. There are no safe zones and no escape. Every displacement that we've seen over the past weeks just pushing families further into desperation and deepening homelessness with the lack of sense of safety.
What happened was that all of a sudden we saw people running. We asked, what's going on? People said it's evacuation for the building behind. The building was bombed and caused all this damage, and we could not take any of our belongings. There was no Hamas in the area, just business owners and stores.
So I'm just walking through the rubble. You easily realize this is not a humanitarian crisis. It's a dismantling of civilian life across the Gaza Strip. Every home that is destroyed, it's not just about the buildings that are being destroyed. It's the future, it's the histories, as well as the dreams of people who once lived inside these homes. It's more than just a crisis. It's breaking a whole entire society. A combination of enforced starvation and relentless attacks. Gaza is being made unlivable, one home and one neighborhood at a time. And the world must not look away. Hani Mahmoud, Al Jazeera, from Gaza City, Palestine.
Since genocide by Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces against the Palestinian people is what is at stake here, I would like to read out some sections of the Convention Against Genocide passed by the United Nations in 1948. And Human Rights Watch, of course, is saying that nations that signed that agreement have a duty to prevent genocide. Now, the introduction to the Genocide Convention noted that at all periods of human history, genocide has inflicted great losses on humanity. And here's Article 1 and Article 2. Article 1. The contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law which they undertake to prevent and to punish. Article 2. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Hani Mahmoud is a brave, clear voice reporting from northern Gaza. That is important because 2 weeks ago, a little more than 2 weeks ago, Human Rights Watch warned that there was an Israeli plan to create enormous violence in northern Gaza in order to push the population to the south. That is a violation of the Geneva Convention and its prohibition of forced dislocation of people. We are going to shift now in this International Press Review to another journalist and the question of genocide, a very different person, here in Quebec, also brave, also clear in voice, a young woman, a very special woman that I'm going to tell you about. Her name is Émilie Nicolas. She's trained as an anthropologist, but has been a journalist for quite some time, writing a column for the famous nationalist paper here in Montreal, Le Devoir. She also appears on English television, CBC television, as a commentator. Émilie Nicolas has a way of expanding people's view of things in a very successful fashion, I think. Here's a clip of her on English language television talking about a recent election campaign and how one might broaden one's view.
The campaign is gun control, but we haven't somehow made the connection between that and violence against women. The only connection that's been made is with street gangs, right? Black people, Black youth being dangerous. But there's no connection to people of all background actually assaulting women with said firearms. Like that's not, so we can see where the Canadian imaginary is at. And I think it's really important, at least I try to do that when I analyze a political campaign, to analyze as much what is said, as much as what is not said, because I think the silence sometimes speaks volume.
Silence speaks more strongly, says Émilie Nicolas, in the Canadian imagination. That Genocide Convention that I read out loud a few minutes ago talks of specifically bodily harm visited upon people, killing, murder, attempts to lower the birth rate of a group, to transfer children away from their homes and their mothers to other places. These are all parts of genocide. And Canada, the Canadian government, has committed exactly that kind of genocide against the native people of this country. It's part of the heavy heritage of the Canadian imagination. I first took notice of Émilie Nicolas as a writer in Le Devoir, and it was reading a wonderful column she wrote about her mixed heritage, because she is both Haitian and Québécoise. And the column was a beautiful essay about her love for her grandmother, her Quebec grandmother. It was a wonderful piece. This opinion by Nicolas, La Couronne et la Décolonisation, was published on May 29th of this year. In English, that's The Crown and Decolonization. Nicolas is very interested in decolonization, human rights, of course, genocide in Canada. We have a truth and reconciliation process going on right now, and it's only been in the last decade that Canadians have acknowledged the genocide that was committed here. Nicolas' column is really interesting because Canada is not a republic. It is a constitutional monarchy like Australia and New Zealand. The state is often referred to as the Crown. For example, in a trial, the Crown rests its case, and the head of state in Canada is in fact King Charles of England. But Nicolas makes some very interesting points in this column. King Charles of the United Kingdom has just finished a very short visit to Canada. He gave the throne speech in the Canadian Parliament. That was an idea of Mark Carney's, the new Canadian Prime Minister. Canada's been attacked by Donald Trump, its sovereignty greatly challenged. So Carney pulled a trick out of the Canadian bag of tricks and had the King address Parliament. Now that is important, interestingly, for the native people of Canada. And that's what Nicolas is talking about in her column. Here's a couple of clips to give you an idea of the political ramifications of King Charles' trip.
Turning now to Canada, where King Charles just finished giving a rare address to Parliament. Keep in mind, this is highly unusual for a king to deliver this speech himself. The honor is typically reserved for the king's representative in Canada who speaks on his behalf. The last time we saw a monarch personally give this address themselves was back in 1977, when Queen Elizabeth II was on the throne. King Charles delivered some of his speech in French. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The government's overarching goal, its core mission, is to build the strongest economy in the G7.
messages to the King, King Charles. We want to remind him of his obligations under treaty. We want to remind him to continue to uphold and respect the treaty relationship that his great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, signed with us. When all our chiefs and their predecessors years ago agreed to share this land. It's not supposed to be a one-sided relationship where Canada would dictate our lives by the Indian Act and other pieces of foreign legislation. It was meant to be a respectful relationship where we would continue to live our lives, practice our treaty and inherent rights of hunting, trapping, fishing, and trade amongst one another. It was not meant to be what it is today, which is the oppression of our people. We want to remind the Canadian state of their obligations under treaty.
This press review has touched on a lot of apparently different things: genocide, past and present, genocide in Gaza, genocide committed by the Canadian government against its own native peoples, and their expectation, by the way, to have a continuing dialogue and connection with the Crown in Canada. I think the connecting strain for me in all of this is Émilie Nicolas' idea of the importance of what is silent in our history. I think she's really touched on something. And in that column of hers, she does a very unusual thing if you know about Quebec and Quebec politics. She writes for a nationalist paper, and there's a lot of conservative Quebec nationalists today. In that column, she is reminding them that though they may dislike the monarchy and think it's terribly outdated, that is not the view of Canada's native people, people who are not really all that well heard in Quebec. The First Nations of Canada and of Quebec are not being quiet now. And in her opinion piece, Émilie Nicolas writes about the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And she quotes from a very famous section, which is about the several nations or tribes of Indians in British territory in the 18th century, with whom we are connected, the proclamation writes, and who live under our protection, namely the protection of the Crown, and that they should not be molested or disturbed in the possession of such parts of our dominions and territories as, not having been ceded to or purchased by us, are reserved to them, or any of them. That proclamation is very important. Émilie Nicolas snuck it into her commentary. I think it's great, because the proclamation is the source, the font of Indigenous law in this country. And that is the paradox for people, for example, who might be Republicans in Canada. The Crown continues to be an element of major importance in the decolonization of Canada. This is Patrick Barnard for the International Press Review.